Please very quickly grab a sandwich and get seated because we're about to get started with the spring edition of the World Beyond a Book here at Fulbright University, Vietnam. It is my great pleasure to welcome you back for another season. This is, or another half season. This is our fourth half season. We have some of actually our previous speakers here today. We have Ivan Small from last season here. So if you guys attended his talk, right, we have some of our future speakers in the audience today. I see Nicola Weber. He's gonna give a talk later this season. So it's going to be really wonderful. Basically, the World Beyond a Book series is a speaker series at Fulbright University, Vietnam that I co-founded with Thầy Nam Nguyen in the fall of 2021. And basically, our whole point is to bring the best speakers, the best scholars on Vietnam studies, hopefully physically here to campus when possible, and when not possible, then in online dialogue with our community. Our talks are always free and open to the public, and we try to also reach an international community online as well. And this time it is my and before we start, I just want to offer many thanks to the academic affairs team who have been funding this talk, to finance team, to the IT team who has been with us from the beginning. Thank you so much all the time. And most of all to the communications team of Fulbright University Vietnam, who have always been so supportive. And we really, at Vietnam Studies, we really rely on your help and all of thank you so much for supporting us in previous seasons, and hope for a great spring 2023. And other people that have been supporting us as well are other professors who are not necessarily like in Vietnam Studies, like Mark Frank here, who has been really crucial in putting forward names and nominations and introducing us to amazing speakers. So Mark, please take it away and introduce Professor Cuong Mai. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just offer a very brief introduction. So Professor Cuong Mai is Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at Appalachian State University. So Appalachian State University is set in the hills of Boone, North Carolina, in the Appalachian Mountains. It's a beautiful setting between North Carolina and Tennessee, and I recommend visiting if you ever get the chance. He specializes in pre-modern Chinese Buddhism and Vietnamese religions, and is currently working on a book project which uses narrative texts composed in literary Sinitic to explore religion in medieval and early modern Vietnam from about the 11th to 19th centuries. And I asked Professor Mai what he was calling his book right now. His book project is currently titled The Earths, the Waters, and the Souls of Dead Humans. Is that, I think I got it right. So this talk is entitled Religion in Vietnam, Navigating Tôn giáo, Dinh Nguyen Dao, and Triết. So we're going to hear about the concepts with which we think about religion, faith, and philosophy, and how those are used and have developed in Vietnam. All right, Professor Mai.
Hi. Hello. Is the microphone working? Hi, my name is Cuong Mai. I was actually born in Saigon a long time ago. And my family moved to the United States, and I grew up in the United States and went to college. And when I went to college, I became very interested in philosophy and religion. And so I've been doing that ever since. I decided to dedicate my life to the study of philosophy and religion. And one of the questions that we ask in the discipline of philosophy and religion is, what is religion? What is religion? Does that make sense? What is religion? And so one way to approach this question is to approach it from the view of the liberal arts. So today I'm going to talk about two specific topics, the liberal arts and religious studies. Okay, I'm going to write it down. What is religious studies, and what does it have to do with the liberal arts? Okay, one way to approach these two questions is to take a poll, find out what you think. So I'm going to ask a question, and if you agree, please raise your hand. I won't pick on you. I just want to see how many people agree. Okay? Does religion exist? Please raise your hand if you agree. Does religion exist? Okay, that's near unanimous. The people who aren't raising your hand are eating, which is fine. So religion exists. Okay. Does Christianity exist? Oh, again, unanimous. Very nice. Okay, trick question. Be careful. Does Buddhism exist? Does Buddhism exist? I said it's a trick question. Does Buddhism exist? Oh, it's almost unanimous. Very nice. Very nice. Okay, the purpose of today's talk for me is to convince you that you're wrong. Religion doesn't exist. Christianity doesn't exist. And Buddhism doesn't exist either. Okay? So by the time we finish, I hope to convince you that you don't actually know what you thought you knew when you said that religion exists. Okay? Does that make sense? Does religion exist? You said yes. Because you said yes, I think I'm able to ask you, what is religion? Because you said yes. I assume that you know what it is because you said religion exists. Does anybody want to volunteer what religion is? Now, remember, I didn't force you to raise your hand. You said that you knew that religion exists. So what is religion? What is religion? Any volunteers? Yes. A set of beliefs. Very good. A set of beliefs. Thank you, Fred. A set of beliefs. Anyone else? A set of beliefs. Yes. Tín ngưỡng and tôn giáo. Right.
Tín ngưỡng is something we didn't have the official one.
Mm-hmm.
Tôn giáo is something we a set of belief, but the official set of belief approved by the government or approved by something as a right.
Very good. So tôn giáo is a official set of beliefs. What is tín ngưỡng?
Tín ngưỡng is let's say the customary belief or something like that. So they call phong tục and tín ngưỡng. A set of belief, but didn't approve from the government, I believe.
So tín ngưỡng and tôn giáo is the same. Is it the same thing? No, it's not. But you just explained to me that tín ngưỡng is a set of beliefs, and tôn giáo is a set of beliefs. So they're the same thing.
But tôn giáo is the official one.
Mm-hmm. What is then? Unofficial? What is unofficial belief? How can you have unofficial belief? What does that mean?
I think it's because in tín ngưỡng, tín ngưỡng don't get official recognition from, let's say, official entities.
Mm-hmm.
But we have tôn giáo and Buddhism, and then we have a set of organization behind that support for it to become a religion.
So tín ngưỡng is a part of religion. What does tín mean in the word tín ngưỡng? Belief. What about ngưỡng?
To raise your hand.
Reverence, respect, right? What is tín again? Belief. It's more than belief. What kind of belief? Trust, right? So tín ngưỡng can be translated as something like faith, trust, right? So belief is not always the same as faith and trust, right? I believe this exists, right? Does it make sense to say, I have faith that it exists? No, it doesn't, because you don't need faith to know that this exists. So faith and trust is a type of belief. And I think that's what you were getting at. They're similar but different. So what is religion? It's just a set of beliefs and a system of faith or trust, right? Does everyone agree? Does that make sense? What if I tell you you're wrong? What if I gave an example of religions that do not have a system of belief? What kind of religion doesn't have a system of belief? Shinto, the Shinto religion. Another religion that doesn't have a set of beliefs is Taoism. Okay? The very first chapter of the Tao Te Ching, Tao Te Kin. Dao ke dao, fei chang dao. Ming ke ming, fei chang ming. The Tao that can be named is not the constant Tao. If you can say Tao, the Tao is not the Tao. Right? The Tao is not the Tao. Why is it that in Taoism the Tao is not the Tao? Because the Tao is beyond the word Tao. Right? When I say Tao, think Tao. Just think it, okay? When I say Tao, think of it. Tao. You got it? You got it? Just think Tao. Tao. You got it? No, you don't. You know why you don't have it? Because you can't think of it. Whatever you're thinking is not the Tao. That's what the term Dao ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao, Ming ke Ming, Fei Chang Ming. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao. The Tao that you're thinking of is not the Tao. So if you cannot think of the Tao, can you believe in the Tao? Can you believe in the Tao? No, you cannot. When you believe in the Tao, what are you believing in? The word Tao, which is different from believing in the Tao. So does Taoism have a set of beliefs? I would say it doesn't. It's not important. So by your definition, if religion is a set of beliefs, then Taoism is not a religion. But that doesn't make sense, because Taoism is a religion. So what does that tell you? There's something wrong with this definition. Religion as a set of beliefs doesn't apply in all cases. Doesn't apply in all cases. What is religion? What is religion? What is religion? Very good. Is it the same friend or a different friend? I like this person, your friend. It's a social construct. What's a social construct? What's a social construct? Come on, friend. What's a social construct? Yes.
My friend thinks it's a group of people relying on another group of people to take care of them.
I love that. I love you. Friend, a social construct is a social agreement. It's a social agreement. Right? So religion is a social agreement. Right? Is that what you're saying? Right? Look, I'm going to sit down. Okay? In this culture, when you sit down, you sit like this. Right? By social agreement. You don't sit like this. It's not what? Not polite. Right? That's a social agreement, right? Is this a religion? Am I practicing religion? No. No. So religion is not a social agreement. What is religion? Friend? Yes.
May I come back to your example, Taoism?
Yes.
Why do you think Taoism is a religion?
All right, can you hold on to that question? I promise we'll come back to it. First, we have to define what religion is. What is religion? I'm sensing a lot of frustration now, right? Everyone was smiling. Now I'm sensing frustration, maybe even a little anger, right? Because it seems like I'm leading you on, and we're not getting anywhere, right? You finish your banh mi, right? Now you're full, and now you want your mind to be filled. But this guy is not filling your mind. This guy is just standing here, keep asking you the same question over and over. Now you're frustrated. But I ask you a very simple question. What is religion? What is religion? What is religion? What is religion? What is it? What is religion?
Not a student, but just trying to answer your question. I think it's a set of guidelines that help you go about your day, determine what's right and what's wrong, what's socially accepted, what's not, and then basically trying to make you a better person, ish.
Very good.
That sounds like law.
That sounds like law. I like that. So what is religion? What is it? Look, it's right in front of you. What is it?
Religion.
Thank you. Thank you. And what is that? What did you just say? Religion is a word. Religion is a word. Religion is a word. What kind of word? What kind? English. Very good. It's a word in the English language. We're making good progress. A word in the English language. What kind of word? Is it a name of is it a word for a person? No. Is it a word for a place? No. Is it a word for a thing? It's a concept. What kind of concept? Abstract. Beautiful. Abstract. What's an abstract word? An abstract word is, religion is a word that is abstract, that refers to actual religions. Religion is an abstract term. In other words, it's a category that we use to classify different human activities. Does that make sense? Religion is an abstract term that we use to classify different human activities. These different human activities, sometimes we call Christianity, sometimes we call Islam, sometimes we call Buddhism, sometimes we call Taoism, sometimes we call Confucianism. Sometimes we can call it Shinto. Sometimes we can call it Hindu. So the word religion is an abstract umbrella term that we use to classify all these different religions. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Religion, therefore, is an abstract category, much like the word language. Language is an abstract category in the way that religion is, right? What is the word language used for? To classify different languages. Different languages. Vietnamese, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Thai, Hindi, English, Spanish, French, and so on and so forth. So the word language is an abstract category. Okay? Does language exist? Does language exist? Does language exist? Sorry. Does language exist? Are you sure? Does anybody here speak language? No. You speak a specific language. No one speaks language. No one speaks language in general. Because language is an abstract category. It's actually not a language. It's an abstract category for specific types of languages. The word language is like the word religion. Ooh, how did that happen? Like the word religion.
It's religious.
Religion. Does that make sense? Here's another example. Sports. We all like sports, right? Football, soccer, baseball, football. Right? What's the word sports? It's an abstract category that we use to categorize specific types of sports. What if you ask me, what do I like to enjoy? Somebody asked me, what do I like to enjoy? Ask me.
What do you like to enjoy?
Sports. Ask me what language I speak.
What language do you speak?
Language. Right, does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. Because language is an abstract term for specific languages. When you ask a person what language you speak, you have to say a specific language. So likewise, the word sports, the word religion, the word language are abstract terms for specific religions. Does that make sense? Does religion exist? Does religion exist? That's right, it doesn't. What does exist? Specific religions. Specific religions. You can never go anywhere in the world and say, look, here's religion. When you go anywhere in the world, you go to Japan, you say, hey, here is Shinto. Here is a Shinto shrine. Here is a Shinto priest. When you go to a Buddhist temple, you can say, this is a Buddhist shrine. This is a Buddhist monk. This is a Buddhist nun. You wouldn't say, oh, this is religion. Because religion is an abstract term. Does that make sense? So does religion exist? Does religion exist?
Maybe.
Only as an idea, as a word. Only as a word. In fact, it's a word that's very recent. It's not even old. It's a word that is invented by the West, that arose when Westerners traveled throughout the world and saw different people doing different things, worshiping different gods, bowing to different images, and they said, oh, that is a type of religion. So then the word religion arose in the English language as an abstract category to help people compare different religions. But religion does not exist. Only specific religions. Does that make sense now? Kind of, right? Yes, right? No? Does it not make sense? It's okay to say it doesn't make sense. It's perfectly fine to say it doesn't make sense. I say it all the time. The next question is, religion is an abstract category for specific religions, right? Such as Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Shinto, Hinduism. Does Buddhism exist? I choose that because this is generally a Buddhist culture. Buddhism is everywhere. Does Buddhism exist? By a show of hands, I won't pick on you. Who thinks Buddhism exists? Okay, more skepticism. What if I told you Buddhism does not exist? What would you say? Yes.
I think that Buddhism is not exactly giáo, but people put it to exist. Like we believe that it exists, so therefore it exists.
You believe it exists, therefore it exists? Are you sure?
Not only me, but like many people believe it and it.
A lot of people believe something. Does that guarantee that it actually exists? It's perfect. I believe I have $1 million in my pocket. I really believe it. I really sincerely believe. I hope it's true. Is it true? It definitely is not true.
Wait, I have a
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
I mean, you also cannot see gravity, but you believe gravity exists, right? So you don't see Buddhism, right? But you believe it, like, can't. I don't know.
Is the word gravity like the word Buddhism? Is it the same type of word? No, it's not. No, it's not. What kind of word is Buddhism? It's an abstract category that refers to actual communities of people doing things, believing things, saying things, and valuing things. But Buddhism is what? Is an abstract category that we use to understand these different communities. Buddhism is an abstract term that was created by whom? Is that Sanskrit? Is that Pali? Is that Chinese? Is that Vietnamese? Turns out that the word Buddhism is another invented term that was created in modern times by Westerners to refer to different communities throughout Asia who they thought were doing the same thing. And so they said, oh, this is Buddhism. And when you say this is Buddhism, what you're saying is what people are doing in Saigon, what people are doing in Nha Trang, what people are doing in Kyoto, what people are doing in Nepal is the same thing. But it's not the same thing. You think it's the same thing because it all fits under this category. And that's the problem with the word Buddhism. The problem with the word Buddhism is that we believe, because of the word, that everything that we place under it is doing the same thing or has the same characteristic. But as you can imagine, what people are doing in Saigon and what people are doing in Kyoto and what people are doing in Canada, really, really different. Really different. I don't even know if it's the same religion, to be honest. But if I call it all Buddhism, then I assume that they're all doing the same thing, which is to say it's the same phenomena. Does that make sense? So does Buddhism exist? Ooh. Does Buddhism exist? It exists as an abstract category for very complex human phenomena scattered throughout Asia. You can say the same thing about Islam. Islam is a word that refers to different Muslim communities in the Middle East, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. Hey, it's the same religion, right? They're doing really different things. So different, they will radically disagree with each other. But because you call it one thing, you think it's all the same phenomena. Yes, please.
You're saying that Buddhism doesn't exist because it's just this abstract concept, and we have a word for it. Call it Buddhism.
Yes.
So let's look at, for example, university. We call a lot of things university. We call this university. We call RMIT university. We call public university or
Sure.
in Vietnam, the university. It's still this word that just categorize all of these schools. But I know for sure, because I've visited many universities,
Yeah.
we're doing different things. We're also believing different things. So does university exist?
That's it. What is the idea of a university? Right? University. And then you have different examples. And you can put all the different schools that you mentioned. And by doing that, you're assuming that they have some similar characteristic through all of them. Some similar characteristic. Right? does university exist? It exists as a concept. It exists as a concept with specific local manifestations. All the local manifestations are going to be really, really different. And by calling them all university, my question to you is university actually there? Is it actually there? Because I can take you to some universities that I believe are not even universities. They call themselves universities. Does that make sense? It's a good question. It's a good question because it's the same problem. An abstract category for specific people, places, and things. Whenever you group specific people, places, and things together under an abstract category, you're making an assumption, an intellectual assumption, that somehow they share some common essence or definition. And one example is Taoism. By grouping it under the category of religion, you've already assumed that it's a system of belief, because that's what you define religion as. Taoism is one of the most interesting religions because it challenges the Western definition of religion. Shinto is another extremely fascinating non-Western religion that challenges the Western definition of religion as a system of belief in a higher power or God. I teach in the United States, specifically in the South. It's known as the Bible Belt. Majority Christians. When I ask them to define religion, what do they say? A system of belief about God. It makes total sense to them. If I took them to Japan and look at a Shinto shrine, what happens? Get very confused. There's no God. There's no God. There's no Bible. Jesus is not there. There's no system of belief. There's no system of belief that you can agree to and then say, you're Shinto. Shinto is a matter of what you do, not what you believe. It's what you do. Likewise, Taoism is a matter of what you do, not what you believe. It doesn't matter whether or not you believe in the Tao. It's what you do with your body. What you eat, what you drink, how you sleep, where you live, and how you move your body. If you say, I believe in the Tao, and don't practice it, it's pointless from the view of Taoism. So Taoism is a very interesting phenomenon because it challenges our definition of religion in the English language, because it does not privilege, it does not raise set of belief as the highest. It raises rather practices as the highest. Does that make sense? And when we say Taoism is a religion, the danger of assuming that religion exists is that we assume that Taoism looks like Christianity, basically. And then when it doesn't look like Christianity, we say, oh, it's not a religion. Well, maybe your definition of religion is too what? Too narrow, too short. And you won't know that it's narrow or short until you begin to ask yourself, what is religion? It's a word. Where did the word come from? And what ideas are already embedded in the word that forces you to see specific communities in a specific way that doesn't match what they're doing? So I'm going to pause here to ask you, does religion exist? It exists as an idea. It doesn't exist as an actual social phenomenon, because you can't find religion anywhere. You can only find specific religions. Language exists only as an idea. It actually exists in specific language communities that speak specific languages. Sports is an idea. Society is an idea. A university is an idea. A nation is an idea. I was going to ask you a question, but I don't want to raise that. You all would be very angry at me, so I'll just set that aside. Yes. Oh, yeah, I'm going to take a question behind you, then I'll take yours, because you had a question first.
Yeah, I had a question before. Because when you say Taoism and Shintoism,
Yeah.
I believe they have a set of beliefs. Because, for example, Taoism, it's in the thing you do. It's actually in the thing you do and in the way you live. But the central belief, the core belief is that you have to be in harmony with nature, right? The same with Shintoism. I think the central belief is that in Shinto, we believe every item of nature has a soul. So a has a soul, a storm has a soul. So I still believe there's sets of beliefs in
Yeah.
those you call religion. And also the example or the comparison, when you just compare this set of religions or traditions. So Taoism, not only religions, they are traditions in Chinese, right?
Mhm.
You only benchmark against Christianity,
Yeah.
which is, in my point of view, I think it's a very Western way of looking at things. Because maybe Taoism or Shintoism is even older. And Western civilization isn't the only civilization.
I agree with you. Thank you. I agree with you. I agree because of several things that you've said. One, the word religion is an English word. Its root is in English. And embedded in it, when we speak it, we carry with it a series of assumptions that are Western. For example, I studied Chinese Buddhism and Vietnamese religions. When I was in grad school, you couldn't study Vietnamese religions. You couldn't do it. You know why? Because there was no professor teaching it. So I had to study Chinese religion. Not that I had to, I love to. Okay. And when I was studying Chinese religion, one of the things I found out was the concept of religion in the English language is too narrow. Too narrow. It didn't help me at all. It made me question the word religion itself. It made me question the word religion itself. And it's a question I still carry. I actually don't know what religion is. I know that when I say the word religion, I impose biases and assumptions that are extremely Western. And one way to overcome that is to study Chinese religion. To read Chinese texts, for example, Chinese texts about Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and I couldn't find the word religion. I couldn't find the word zhongjiao, the Vietnamese word for dong yao. I found the word Dao. I found the word Dao. I found the word Jiao, Yao, which means teachings. The word teaching, the word Dao, the word ngưỡng doesn't map completely onto the word religion. So we have to break it down into smaller pieces and then question what we even mean by system of belief. Some people, for example, want to say that Taoism is a religion because it has a system of belief. That strategy assumes what? Assumes that a system of belief is the standard. It's the standard that Taoism has to meet to be a religion. What I'm saying is, why? It doesn't have to. I agree with you. It doesn't have to. In fact, we should question, what is a system of belief? What is a system of belief? What is a belief? What does it mean to have a belief? Turns out it's really, really what? Difficult. Because there are gradations of belief. Belief is not a single thing. Belief is a spectrum of attitudes towards the world. It can be everything from an attitude, an orientation, an assumption, a suspicion, to a belief, a strongly held belief. All of this fits under the category of belief. Turns out we can even ask, does belief exist? You should. You spend a couple of years thinking about it, which will be a good use of your time. Because I don't know if belief exists. I know we use the word, but I don't know what it refers to. Because I know that there's a whole range of, let's say, mental activities that we simplify by saying it's a belief. For example, there are assumptions. Or assumptions belief. Assumptions are things that I assume to be the case, but I don't really know. I've never had to say it. Turns out in many Asian religions, like Taoism, like Shinto, I would say they don't have beliefs. They have assumptions. They have assumptions. They have assumptions that they get transmitted from their parents, their grandparents. And then they do it. And if you ask them, what do you believe? Do you believe the kami exists? In Japanese, that doesn't make sense. Doesn't matter if you believe the kami exists. If you see a shrine, be respectful. Does the kami exist? I don't know. Do you believe it exists? I don't know. I just know that when I pass by a shrine with a kami, I pay my respect. And that's what people do in Japan. So then we can ask again, what is belief? Does it apply to Shinto? And as you can see, there's a general trend here. The general trend is we use words to describe religion all the time, and if we stop and ask, what does the word refer to, what happens? We find that we actually don't know. We find that we actually don't know if Buddhism exists, if religion exists. We know that there are Buddhist things, Buddhist people, Buddhist places, Buddhist practices, but if we call it Buddhism and we call what's happening in Kyoto, Saigon, and Canada Buddhism, then we've made an assumption that they're doing the same thing. And if you actually go and you talk to people, you find out they're actually not doing the same thing. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. So, given that you told us that religion is not exist, and is it possible universities also does not exist because, yeah. So I would like to ask a silly question like, do I exist?
That's an excellent. Do you exist? I don't know. Do you?
I don't know.
Good. If you don't know, I don't know how I can know. But to step aside from the joke, that's a very profound philosophical question. What does it mean to exist? Because you change through time, right? Different aspects of you change through time. Is there an essence about you that does not change through time? And different traditions, different religions have answers to that. Christianity has an answer to that. You definitely exist. But the most important thing about you is not your body. It's not your body, because this changes. It's born, it lives, and it dies. There's something else that's really you. It's really you. Buddhism says the same thing. You do exist, but it's not your body. That's the most important thing about that which exists. It's your mind. Your mind. It's your mind that continues. That continues when your body stops living, when your heart stops, which will eventually happen to all of us. Some of us sooner. In Buddhism, the most important part to the answer of do you exist is you do not exist, but there is something about you that will continue after you stop existing. And that is your mind. That is your mind. So different religions will give you different answers to that very profound question. Very profound. And some religions take these answers they give and they form a system of belief. But not all religions have a system of belief. Does that make sense? Very good. Yes? Sure.
How does religion differ from philosophy?
Oh, this is a very good question. That would take about 3 hours. So we're probably not going to answer it. But to step aside from the joking and to be serious, the distinction between philosophy and religion comes from where? Comes from the English language. When you say, what is the difference between philosophy and religion, you've already assumed that they're different. You've already assumed that they're different. And my question to you is, where does that assumption come from? It comes from the West. It comes from the West. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it accurate? That's a different question. I'm just saying where it comes from. The distinction between philosophy and religion. Now, how could you answer that? Well, you could go to ancient China. Did the ancient Chinese make a distinction between philosophy and religion? No. In fact, they didn't. Did the ancient Vietnamese make that distinction? As far as we know, they didn't. Did the Japanese make that distinction? They didn't. Did the ancient Indians, the classical Hindu philosophers, did they make that distinction? No, they didn't. So who came up with this distinction? How did it arise? And why is it that when we say these words, we are imposing the Western view of the world onto ourselves? Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying, where does it come from? Where does it come from? Where does the distinction between philosophy and religion come from? You look at Buddhism. Did Buddhism make that distinction? Is there a difference between Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist religion? Short answer, no. You couldn't separate them. They were the same thing. They were the same thing. They were the same thing. What about Christianity? They're the same. If you look at everything from the New Testament to Dante, Divine Comedy, about 1321, there's no distinction between philosophy and religion. There was something that combined philosophy and religion, and that was considered the highest form of knowledge. What is that? Something that combines philosophy and religion, and it was considered in the West as the highest form of knowledge. That was known as theology. So if you want to answer, where does the distinction between philosophy and religion come from? You look at the West. And then when people ask you, is Buddhism a philosophy or a religion? What should you say? What I would say is, I don't know. What do you think philosophy, how does philosophy and religion differ? Does that make sense? So that's just the beginning. It's the beginning of a very interesting investigation of how we use words to understand human reality and why we should always, as much as possible, be aware of where words come from and what assumptions they have in them. What assumptions they have in them. How can I move this? Oh, thank you. So back to the liberal arts and religious studies. Religious studies, the discipline that I work in, is the academic study of religion by questioning the very terms that we use to study religion, such as what is religion, what is belief, what is ritual, what is practice, what is ritual. We use the word all the time, and I confess I have no idea what it is. I've studied it for years. I've read hundreds of books on ritual. Now I'm completely confused. I've read hundreds of books on religion. Now I'm completely confused. I'm confused because different scholars will use the word religion in different ways. And what we always try to do is be aware of the categories we use to study religion. When we pay attention to the ideas that we use to study human reality, I believe that is one of the best definitions of a university. It's a special place where we are set aside from society to think deeply about the ideas that we use to understand reality, to question where the ideas come from and what biases they have, such as the idea of religion itself. Such as the idea of religion itself. Where did it come from? What assumptions does it have? Or you can talk about history. What is history? What is literature? What is literature? What is poetry? These are categories, abstract categories we use constantly to try to understand Vietnamese history, Chinese history, Japanese history. And when we use it, we have implied assumptions that we should always question. When we question the assumptions we use to understand human phenomena, I believe that's what the liberal arts does. The liberal arts is the study of human phenomena, but also the study of the terms we use to study human phenomena. Does that make sense? That's why we call it higher education, because it requires abstract thinking, which is really, really hard, extremely hard. But that's what the liberal arts does. Because when we do that, when we pay attention to the words we use to understand reality and the history of the words, we are liberated, free. We are free, we free ourselves from the assumptions that we carry. And maybe we can begin to see something different. Maybe we can say crazy things like religion doesn't exist, or Buddhism doesn't exist. I know it's crazy. But what if it's true? If it's true, then you can free yourself from the word religion and try to find different ways of defining it that's not so narrow and biased. If you can do that, then what you're engaging in is the study of religion as a liberal arts. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Mai. Clearly there's a lot of engagement, challenges, thought from students, staff, and faculty already. So what I want to do is open it up to further questions. If anyone has further questions, comments, thoughts, maybe I guess part of my job is stimulating discussion by posting an initial question. I don't want to take up much time with that. And then we can just open it up to two-way, multi-way conversation. Okay, so I wanted to just add one more challenge onto the ones that you've already faced from the audience, which is, so this is, I find this really stimulating and, unsettling but stimulating. Sometimes to me it seems that the fact that there are multiple definitions of what something is doesn't necessarily mean that that thing does not exist. And so an example is we could have competing definitions for what a religion is. And one person might say that a religion is a theory of the origin of the universe. And another person might say, well, no, that doesn't, Taoism and Confucianism don't really fit into that. Certain Confucianism doesn't really fit into that. And I think Confucianism is a religion. So that person might say, well, a religion is an organized set of beliefs. You each sort of encircle a set of ideas, a set of communities, I should say, that I think do exist. And so if I say religion is a community organized around a moral philosophy of what's right and wrong, I can identify specific communities that fit into that category that are real, and not everybody will agree with that definition, but I'm qualifying it in order to be more specific and concrete. The reason I bring this up is it seems to me that that religion does sort of have a community aspect in that sometimes people will come together in ecumenical situations and say, we are religious, and there are people who are not like us. They're not religious. They're atheists or they're non-religious. And often that's a big social divide. And so, for example, the Dalai Lama has said something to the effect of, it's whatever religion you practice is fine as long as you have a religion. Just don't be atheist. So there are communities of people who feel that they have something in common, which is that they have beliefs in something supernatural or something that can't be explained by first-hand observation. You brought up the idea of the nation. Benedict Anderson has this theory that the nation, you can't observe it, but it's not fake either. It's an imagined community of people who believe that they are part of a common thing, and therefore that thing, at least in his terms, kind of exists. It's not imaginary, but it's imagined into existence. So is there a difference between saying religion does not exist on one hand and saying that religion is an imagined community of people who feel that they have a particular thing in common, whether it's belief in God or belief in a moral system or so on, and therefore it's something real but imagined. Okay, so I guess to summarize that, what I'm trying to say, are there ways that we can clarify and qualify what something like religion means that make it a real thing, or is it just fundamentally an abstract concept that corresponds to nothing real in the world?
That's a very interesting series of comments that, on the whole, I actually agree with, and I didn't get to it, but I think that once we clear the way of using the word religion to refer to an actual thing in the world, something that we imagine into existence, then we can say, how do different communities imagine their world into existence? Right? Two different things. Like, how do Buddhists imagine themselves to be practicing giáo, the teachings of the Buddha? That would be an imagined community. And then that would actually exist because they say it exists. And they are committed to making it exist. But that is a specific community. It's not a general community that is global. They're not saying this is Buddhism, which is the same as the thing that people are doing in India, the same thing that people are doing in Japan. In my mind, the only people who do that are scholars, right? They imagine a Buddhism into existence in order to look at different specific communities. When different specific communities imagine themselves, usually they're imagining their communities as participating in something, if it's religious, like cosmic, right? Like the Buddha Dharma as a cosmic manifestation that began with the lifetime of the actual Buddha. So they imagine their lineage that links back to that. I would argue that is not the same as Buddhism, right? So Buddhism, you can say, using your insight, you can say it's different communities imagining themselves into existence as related to the original community of Prince Siddhartha in ancient India. But we also know that different communities in Nepal, in Canada, in Australia, who we label Buddhists, don't always do that. Pure Land Buddhism, for example. Pure Land Buddhism is a very interesting case study because the figure of Amitabha, or Asiddhava, now is of central importance, more so than Siddhartha, right? So they're now creating a different idea of what their community is doing, right? So they imagine themselves into existence. I totally agree. And I just want to push that further and say that when we invoke the word Buddhism or Islam or Christianity or religion in general, what are we imagining into existence? And I doubt that whatever we're imagining corresponds to what people are actually doing. Yes.
Thanks for that really fascinating presentation. Thank you.
was a really interesting exercise that you presented for us to think through. So on that note, I wanted you to explain a little bit about what do you think is both the use and the lore to think about religion in an abstract terms, because I'm sure as a scholar in your work, you would probably explore the specificities that you mentioned in your answer a little bit, but what do you think is the use and the lore to think about the religion as an abstract term, and what would be, what could we what could be the takeaway point from the conventional approach to religion, which is more specific, but to think of it as an abstract, and why is that continued lore for people to think about religion and religions more specifically as well as abstractly?
Yeah, so I don't know if I understand that question completely, but I'm going to try to address it by saying that when we pay attention to how the word religion as an abstract category is used in scholarship, we see that it's first of all used in a comparative way to actual religions together and to compare them. How does Islam compare to Buddhism? How does Taoism compare to Shinto? How does Hinduism compare to Confucianism? Right? So one useful function of an abstract category like religion is that it allows us to pick and choose human phenomena and to see and compare actual human phenomena. Very, very small definitions of religion were only certain phenomena. If you broaden the abstract term to something like a group of people who gather together to agree on right and wrong and who practice it on a weekly basis and think it's the most important thing to do, then now you can include sports. Should you? By saying that religion doesn't actually exist, that it's a word that we use to study human phenomena, we can say, yeah, we'll study sports as a form of religion. We'll study ideology as a form of religion. We'll study shopping culture, consumerism as a type of religion. Why can't we not? If you have an essentialist definition of religion, then you really can't, because basketball is not a religion, right? But if we broaden it, if we pay attention to how we use a category, then you can play with it more and then study different phenomena. I don't know if that addresses your question. I mean, there are other ways too, because there are other ways of doing abstract work with abstract categories, because now you can begin to theorize religion and culture, religion and society, religion and politics, religion and gender, religion and the environment, religion and astronomy. It turns out to be really important. Religion and poetry, religion and literature, right? So this abstract category, it's very useful. The more you realize that it is an abstract category that we created, I think the more useful it becomes, so that you're not stuck to one definition, because you assume that it's actually out there. Does that make sense? If you assume that the word religion actually corresponds to an essence out there, then first of all, you have to give an account of what it is. And we've been doing that for a long time. As far as I know, we haven't come to an agreement. And it's not that different definitions are not useful. It's asking, what is the function of a definition to begin with? Right? Not what is religion, but what is the function of the word religion? Yes. That's a great question. I will have to come back in about 2 or 3 years. I've only started my research on Vietnamese religions. I'm trained in the history of Chinese religions, which I find very useful for understanding Vietnam. And my current research project is using literature to understand pre-modern religion in Vietnam. So I feel like I do not have the authority to speak on it yet. I do have theories that I'm working on, and I've written about it and published on it, but they're mostly about pre-modern Vietnam, not contemporary Vietnam. But one thing I do want to mention, because some of you may find it interesting, is that Western thinking about religion is now enmeshed into Vietnamese thinking about religion, so that your thinking about religion is very Western, very Western. And I invite you to think about that and the consequences of that, and what does that mean about how you understand yourself and understand Vietnamese history and culture right now? I think that's a very fascinating question. Thank you.
So I have a question relate to the term engaged Buddhism and disengaged Buddhism. So I've been reading argument of different Western scholars about where Buddhism is engaged or disengaged, and your talk has inspired me to think about it in a, I don't know how to construct it yet, but can you share more about the tension of the Western thinking, like the pressure that it has put upon the, let's say, religions in East Asia?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish we had time to get into it, but maybe we can talk afterwards. But it'll take several hours of discussion, and this should start with definitions. What does engaged Buddhism mean? What has it meant? Where did the word come from? And what is the historical context of the origin of that word? So it's a very modern word. It's a modern word that appeared at a time where Vietnamese Buddhism was caught between the past and the present, right? And so certain thinkers who are highly educated in Western thinking created a term, and in creating that, they implied certain assumptions about Buddhism that is completely modern and Western, to make Buddhism more modern, more Western, more legitimate in Western eyes. And so one question you can ask yourself is, what happens to traditional Buddhism in that process of definition? What gets left out? What gets left out? Why is it only certain things are engaged Buddhism? If you know anything about Buddhism in Vietnam, one thing you can say is, wait, Buddhism has always been engaged. Has always been engaged. Since the Lý dynasty, it's always been engaged. So what's the difference between Buddhism in the Lý and the Zheng, in the Lei, and in the modern period? Why is it that is now it's only engaged? So engagement means something very specific. And in defining it in that specific way, what is being left out, right? I think that's a very interesting series of questions. I don't have the answer to it, but I think it's a very interesting project, for sure.
I have quite a practical question. What I'm seeing is that you're trying to give us that idea by historicizing this term, and I'm thinking about that. Actually, what we're doing is still, we're not free yet. We are still locked in some methodology that we use. You historizing the term so that it leads it to this kind of idea, right? So that does not necessarily bad, but what I'm asking is how to not like being frustrated in those linguistic theory. What the story of yesterday is I read a an article in Anh Hoàng class, and I stopped right when I read the term Saussure and something F. You remember the SF theory? Those linguistic theory? Yeah. What we're trying to study all of this is we stop right when we meet the linguistic theory. What to not die there and keep thinking about this thing.
I don't know if there was a question. Is there- I understand what you're trying to say. I understand.
It's about like the method and maybe about the process of thinking about this. We're actually applying some certain method to study this, and that method has some certain like block to understand those abstract things. So just maybe a personal sharing about how you overcome all of this abstract linguistic theory.
Oh,
She's
oh,
a bit
personal.
traumatized because I got
Yeah.
her to read some Heaven Lung, some of his
Oh,
other
yeah,
works.
yeah. That is advertising. You can't overcome it. You just have to feel it. But to be not to stop joking. The point here is almost very simple, which is we understand the world through the words that we use, and we should pay attention to the history of the words and how it narrows our view and how it enlarges our view. One example is religion. And so the study of non-Western religions is one way of getting outside of the Western definition of religion, is one way. So if you ask me, what do? What I do is I sit in my office and I dream. I try to imagine different ways of thinking about religion that is not constrained by the legacy of my professors. And when I think of how they would think of me, they would say, I'm a good student, because they want me to surpass them. And I want all of you to surpass me. In 10 years, you should say, oh, I learned a lot from that guy, but now I know what religion is. Now I have a theory. That will only happen if you stop and say, I'm suspicious of what I understand. I don't think I really understand what religion is. And that's a very difficult thing. It's not easy. It's not easy. And it's never finished. And you don't know if you're right. And a lot of people will argue against you. And sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes I'm wrong a lot of times. So I may be wrong right now. Sorry. It's quite possible. But what I'm not wrong about is the importance of attending to the words we use to understand human reality. That I'm certain of. Yes.
So thank you so much for a very stimulating discussion and kind of deconstructing this idea of religion. So just to follow up on that, the title of your talk is Defining Religions in Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
So religions is a category that can be deconstructed. Vietnam is also a category that can be deconstructed. But as suggested at the beginning of the talk with some of the responses, is that there is a legal category of official religions, right?
Yeah.
And there's a legal category of, the nation state of Vietnam as it exists today. And so I was wondering, are you able to trace back through different, legal nation-state regimes that have competed over time, Socialist Republic of Vietnam, the Republic of Vietnam, the colonial, state of Vietnam, going back to the Nguyen Dynasty and prior, at what point do you see this concept of religion starting to emerge in documents that is somehow separate from a more kind of theological idea in which philosophy and religion are combined, which you say is, more in line with some of the traditions that you see in kind of the pre-modern past?
Right. That's a great question. And we were actually talking about that, Mark, before. And I don't have an answer. And I'm giving this talk to hopefully inspire some young people to answer that for us. I am mostly a historian of pre-modern Vietnam. I don't study 20th century Vietnam, 19th century Vietnam, I think is where you're going to find the answer to that question. So I would say we can learn a lot from how the word religion was introduced into China, in modern China, how it's introduced into modern Japan. There's a lot of literature on that. We study those and Vietnam as a case study. So if some young person is really interested in that, that would make a great dissertation to basically say how was the word religion invented in the Vietnamese consciousness in modernity. I would love to read that dissertation if one of you would write that, please. Soon. I would love to read it, but I don't have a specific answer myself. But it would have some lineage with the introduction of the modern idea of religion in Japan. Because as we know, Donyao comes from Zhongjiao and Shukyo, which is a modern Japanese invention that emerges from a collision with the West. Because the Japanese decided, oh, we need to define what religion is based on the word religion. We need to find a correlate word, right? So I don't know the history of that in modern Vietnam. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the sharing. I really agree a lot with all of that. And you know, here we also taught students about how, you know, xã会, 社会, you know, and ideas about and these sorts of terms also came via that route. And Kang Yo Wei, Liang Qichao, right, the really big titans of Chinese learning, and Dong Zhu, the Eastern learning movement of Vietnam, by which these concepts entered Vietnamese lexicon. And I think these are going to be, I think for the students that took MVCS, right, you can definitely plug many of these ideas, because we don't talk so much about Tôn giáo, about religion, but I think it's very much among those words that were getting into Vietnamese lexicon at that time. And I know that your expertise is more in early traditions like, you know, Buddhism, Taoism. So this is a bit outside your wheelhouse, but I just wonder if, because a number of our students have done projects on Taoism, on Hoa Hao, you know, and you know, some people would say, is Hoa Hao a part of Buddhism? Is it not? Right? That's you know. So I wonder if, and because one of the things you said is the way that Vietnamese people now think about religion has been so conditioned by that entry of Tôn giáo as a category into both our philosophy and also our legal system, right? But at the same time that these things enter Vietnam, there's still these really interesting Tôn giáo that come up, right? Like Hoa Hao, like Cao Dai, that even in the modern day, even though historically they emerged much later, right, already challenge many Western ideas of what is a religion, right? So what I mean is it just the early modern, you know, Eastern religions that challenge these, or, you know, why at the same time that we're getting these Western ideas of religion into Vietnam, we are still coming up, you know, with, and you know, the other sorts of religious right? Like the still, I don't know, challenge these things. What is it, I guess, that gives us these interesting Tôn giáo that are not Tôn giáo, right?
Yeah. I don't know how to answer that question. I think it's a really good question. The reason I don't know how to answer it, again, because I'm not a modern historian. But if a student here is interested in that, I could recommend some questions that you should be able to address, to raise yourself. And the stuff that I'm working on, I think one way it can inform modern changes in religion when you have the arrival of colonialism, Catholicism, right? And the continuing movement of actual Chinese immigrant communities constantly from China, reintroducing Chinese religious practices as well. When you have all mixed, one thing that I find very convenient to think about is different levels, what I call different registers of discourse, different registers of language, which means that the Vietnamese language has different registers for doing different conceptual work. One level of language is utilitarian, very concrete. That's a chair, that's a table, that's a building, that's a field, that's a family. Another level is more abstract. That level of discourse is a level of connecting concrete. What is the relationship between this field and my family? Ownership. What is ownership, right? So ownership is another level of discourse that implicates law, right? Implicates custom. But I would say it's another register of discourse. Now, when you talk about religious discourse, you're talking about a level up here. And by up here, what I mean is the religious discourse is trying to connect a whole series of different levels of phenomena. And that's one of the ways that I define religion, actually, is a particular mode of discourse that tries to rearrange reality, that tries to rearrange human reality by saying that different levels of reality, right? And so when the Gaudaic tradition emerges, what I find most interesting is that not only is that new ideas, but new ways of expressing ideas, new ways of expressing ideas, new ways of combining old ideas, right? New frameworks of combining ideas. So that level of discourse is higher than this, right? And then it's connected to this other thing because whenever you start to try to combine different human phenomena, the first thing that people will always ask you is, what right do you have? What authority do you have to start saying, oh, Buddhism is just another religion like Taoism, like Confucianism, the three religions. Like, where'd you get that from? Right? And what the Gaudai said is, we got it through a revelation from Gaudai. So that's, you see that reference to a higher authority to do the really high order register of combination, right? And I think that when you look at it, what you'll see is there's a traditional level and also a very modern, right? A very modern, new, non-traditional way of reorganizing discourse. That's how I've always thought of Gaudai. Not just that it's a new combination, but it's the way that the new combination is made and the way that it's authenticated. The way that it's authenticated, right? And that level, that register is partly traditional because it relies on the authority of spirit revelation, which is very old in Vietnam, very old in China. But the new way, the new part of organizing, new way of combining, very Western, is the idea of a universal religion that combines all religions. Because that presumes this idea of religion, a universal idea of religion. So if you wanted to track like the usage of religion, I think Gaudai would be an excellent example. Again, I confess I don't know that much, right? But if one of you would write a dissertation, I would really appreciate it if you could do it quickly so that the rest of us could learn from your investigation. Yes.
Like especially in like indigenous communities, like when I came to Cambodia, I was like, oh, like a lot of people, a lot of communities that believe in different set of spiritual beliefs, and they talk about like nature, God, or like different type of like sacred rivers and that kind of thing. So like, how do you distinguish or like how do you want us to think about religion versus like spirituality, and how does that look like in Vietnam, the two terms?
Yeah, I mean, again, that would be 3 or 4 hours to get to warm up. And then the 3 or 4 hours, we should begin with saying, where does that distinction come from? Religion and spirituality. Why are the two different things? Who says they're two different things? Where did this idea come from that they're two different things? That religion and spirituality are different? Who made up that distinction? Why do we keep repeating it? Do we find it in other parts of the world? And how is that distinction used now? Right? And maybe what political purposes are used with that distinction as well? Because what you say, it sounds like that distinction is to legitimate our indigenous community as authentic, as real. And by saying it's spiritual, you're basically saying, and you have no right to define it, only we can define it. That's a very powerful form of discourse, right? This is spirituality, it's our tradition, it's who we are, and you have no right to define it. And I would ask you, is it therefore a coincidence that marginalized people use that discourse? I don't think it is, right? I don't think it is. But we should, in my mind, we should always go back to where does that distinction come from and how is it used now?
We might have time for one more question, and then we should let Professor Mai get some lunch. Okay.
Well, thank you for a very insightful talk. I think that I really
Thank
like
you.
your idea of talking about the concept and its limitations.
Thank you.
Right.
Yes.
And I'm curious, now that you're talking about language, I'm curious to see what you think about the connection between what you just said and semiotic studies, specifically the signifier and signified. So what I understand here is we can say that the word religion is a signifier,
Yeah.
and the concept of religion that it refers to is a signified. But you also just argue that the concept of religion can actually homogenize our understanding of very different phenomena that
Yes.
happen in reality, right? So I wonder if you're engaging with semiotic studies and point out its limitations possibly by arguing that there's another level, like another multitude of realities beneath the layer of the signified that semiotic studies haven't really accounted for. So I'm curious about how you engage with semiotic studies in that sense.
That's a great question. I do not. But I do not because it's not because I'm not interested or I think it's not important. It is important. It's just that I have a limited time in my day to read really difficult books. That's all. But I think it's really important if other people do. Okay. And one more thing I would say, if I had a graduate student who asked me that question, is I would say, what are the limitations of the semiotic approach to the study of religion? So it's great that you're reading all these books on semiotics. Awesome. Keep doing it. Well, what are the limitations of it? What are you not seeing thereby by focusing on it? And possibly one thing you're not seeing is how embodiment is important in religion, as we see in Taoism, the experience. So embodiment is one's own experience of reality, not really one's representation, right? Not really one's representation or engaging in a process of representing to others and reinforming your representation. But it's a somatic way of it being in the world. And so my question is, does semiotics inform that? I wonder if it does. I don't know. Maybe it does. But I think that that may be one limitation, but I don't know. Again, thank you for the question. It's a great question. And I encourage you to keep thinking about it. Definitely don't stop, but also think of its limitations for the study of religion. Because one of the interesting things about religion is it's not just a system of ideas, but it's a way of being in the world, of having a body, So it's not just communicating, like saying the nature of reality, where the universe comes from, but it's actually being in a way that is, some people think are preferable, right? Eating certain things that are preferable, moving your body in a way that's preferable. Okay.
It's one now. I was going to ask you, if, as a final question,
Sure.
if you could give us sort of the 1 or 2 minute version of what you're doing in terms of research towards your book.
Oh, Oh, okay.
Since this is the World with Beyond a Book series.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to talk about myself. What I'm working on is I've always been interested in Vietnamese religions, like I said before, but when I was in grad school, I was told that you can't really study it because there's nobody teaching it, which is true. So I studied Chinese religion because I loved it, not because I had nothing else to do. And so I've been studying China for a long time, and then I discovered that there are these texts, pre-modern texts, that are basically stories, Jinki and Jitguai, stories about the strange, which my working theory is it actually can tell us a lot about pre-modern religion, basically from 1300s to 1700s. And that when we read this literature, the literature is basically about Buddhist monks, gods, demons, the dead, the underworld, heaven, very religious topics. And my assumption is that when I read this, I can get a lot of understanding about what religion looked like before pre-modern times. But to get from that text to an actual statement is really, really hard because ultimately this is literature. It's not scripture, it's literature, it's stories. And so you have to develop a theory and a method of reading stories to understand religious culture that surrounds it, which is what I've been trying to do. And hopefully I want to find out enough that it becomes a book that raises questions about what religion looked like in Vietnam. And one theory I have is that religion was very much concerned with the earth, the waters, and the souls of dead humans. That's where religion comes from in Vietnam. The earth, the waters, and the souls of dead humans. Not scripture, not Bible, not God, but from the earth, from the waters, and the souls of dead humans. That's the foundation. My working theory is that's the foundation of Vietnamese religion before modern times.
Thanks. So we're at time, and I know that we haven't exhausted all of the questions, so I'd encourage anyone to come and say hi to Professor Cuong Mai and maybe ask some follow-ups if he has the time. You haven't had lunch yet, so we want to make sure you get to eat. But I was telling Cuong that we don't have any full-time philosophy or religious studies faculty on campus, do we? And so it's really a privilege to have somebody come and speak to us on this. We teach on religion-adjacent topics, but this is one area where we don't have a lot of in-house expertise or teaching. So we want to thank Professor Cuong Mai for carving time out of his research travels to come and speak to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to having you come talk to my class tomorrow.
Okay, sure.